On the morning of May 12, 2023, police were called to a residential property in Newport, South Wales. Inside, officers discovered the body of Kelly Pitt, a 44-year-old mother and grandmother. What investigators would later uncover was a story that spoke not only of one family's suffering, but a wider tragedy that affects countless homes across the United Kingdom. The unseen toll of domestic abuse and coercive control. In the days that followed, the community of Newport was shaken by the news. Reports described Kelly as kind-hearted, caring, and always protective of her family. Friends and neighbors spoke of a woman who wanted peace in her home, even when peace seemed difficult to find. The man later convicted in connection with her death was her own son, Lewis Bush, a reality that stunned those who knew them both. The court would later hear that the incident occurred just weeks after Lewis had been released from custody on conditions that prohibited contact with his mother. Those orders were breached, and within days, Kelly was dead. The facts of this case are deeply painful, yet they highlight a truth that extends far beyond one address. How patterns of intimidation, manipulation, and fear can grow quietly until tragedy exposes them in full view. In the next couple of minutes, this documentary examines the case through verified records, court statements, and law enforcement findings. Not speculation, not assumption. We'll explore who Kelly Pitt was and the pressures she faced, how the events of May 2023 unfolded, what investigators found in the days that followed, and why this case has forced renewed attention on family-based violence and the systems meant to prevent it. This is not just a story of one crime. It is a reflection of a pattern, of how silence, stigma, and lack of protection can turn vulnerability into danger. Every statistic, every headline, represents a person who once hoped tomorrow would be diff. Before we continue deeper into Kelly's life and the events that shaped this tragedy, take a moment to subscribe to Crimes and Clues. Here, we tell real stories with truth and respect, exploring how justice, awareness, and prevention can save lives. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next segment, as we go back in time to understand who Kelly Pitt really was, and the warning signs at every on. Missed. This program is based entirely on verified public records, official court documents, and law enforcement statements. It does not imply guilt beyond what has been legally established. The purpose of this documentary is educational and to raise awareness about domestic violence and systemic To understand how this tragedy unfolded, we must first look at the people behind the headlines. A mother who wanted peace and a son whose life had been marked by instability and aggression. Kelly Pitt lived in Newport, South Wales. Friends and relatives described her as a kind-hearted woman, the type who placed her family's well-being above her own. She was a mother of 3 and a grandmother, known locally for her humor and her patience. But behind her front door, Kelly's life was difficult. Over several years, she endured a pattern of intimidation and abuse from her adult son, Lewis Bush. Public records and court documents show that Lewis had a history of violence towards his mother. Police were called to the home multiple times before 2023. At one point, he was jailed for assaulting Kelly, and when released, was placed under a restraining order that prohibited any contact. In interviews after the case, local authorities confirmed that these restrictions were intended to protect Kelly. Domestic abuse professionals often described this hope as protective optimism. Victims may forgive, believing love or time will reform the abuser. For Kelly, this optimism proved costly. After Lewis's release from custody in early 2023, reports show he returned to his mother's home in defiance of court orders. Despite the risk, Kelly allowed him to stay. On May 10, 2023, Kelly spoke briefly with her daughter by phone. It was a short conversation. Background noise hinted at a dispute. Within 48 hours, she would be dead. To those close to her, Kelly's story reveals a painful truth about coercive control. That abuse does not always end when police intervene. It can restart the moment supervision fades. And too often, victims, especially mothers, shield their abusers out of love, fear, or both. In this case, official records and later court testimony confirmed that Lewis Bush was again living with Kelly when she died. Despite existing restrictions, when investigators pieced together her final days, they found missed signals, moments when stronger enforcement or intervention might have changed the outcome. Before we move into the next part, where we examine the events of May 2023 and what investigators discovered, make sure you subscribe to Crimes and Clues. Here, we explore true stories with empathy and accuracy, shining light on the lessons that could prevent future tragedies. Tap subscribe and stay with us as we continue to uncover what really happened inside that Newport home. In May 2023, the events that ended Kelly Pitt's life took place over a few short days in May 2023, inside her modest Newport home. According to verified police and court records, the first sign that something was wrong came on the evening of May 10th, 2023. Kelly spoke briefly with her daughter on the phone. During that call, Ray's voices were heard in the background. The conversation ended abruptly. When relatives were unable to reach Kelly the following day, concern began to grow. On the morning of May 12th, police were called to Kelly's address after family members requested a welfare check. Inside the property, officers discovered Kelly Pitt deceased. Paramedics confirmed she could not be revived. The scene was secured immediately, and an investigation began under the direction of Gwent Police. Forensic teams documented extensive injuries. Pathology later confirmed blunt force trauma as the cause of death. There were no signs of forced entry, an early indication that Kelly likely knew her attacker. Within hours, officers identified Lewis Bush, Kelly's adult son, as a person of interest. He was located and taken into custody for questioning that same day. According to official statements later read in court, Bush was already under a restraining order issued after prior convictions for assaulting his mother. That order prohibited any contact and specifically barred him from visiting her home. The discovery that he'd been living there again led investigators to widen the scope of inquiry, not only to the assault itself, but also to the circumstances that allowed it to happen. Over the next several days, forensic specialists collected physical evidence, digital communications, and CCTV footage. Detectives built a clear chronology of the final 48 hours before Kelly's death. The footage and witness statements confirmed that the two had been seen together near the home shortly before the incident. No third parties were linked to the scene. In subsequent proceedings at Newport Crown Court, prosecutors outlined the findings of the post-mortem examination, witness accounts, and prior police records. Lewis Bush later pleaded guilty to murder, acknowledging responsibility for the attack. In November 2023, he was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 16 years before parole consideration. During sentencing, the court heard victim impact statements describing Kelly Pitt as a loving mother who wanted only peace. The presiding judge noted the prolonged pattern of intimidation that had preceded her death and called the assault ferocious. For the community, the verdict brought relief but not closure. For those studying domestic violence, it raised painful questions. Why would protection orders breach so easily? Could more decisive intervention have saved Kelly's life? As the courtroom fell silent, Kelly Pitt's family began the long process of grieving. Yet her story does not end with conviction. It extends into a nationwide conversation about domestic abuse, coercive control, and the limits of protection orders. Before we explore how the investigation unfolded and what lessons it revealed, take a moment to subscribe to Crimes and Clues. Here, we examine real cases with accuracy and empathy, bringing light to stories that matter. Hit subscribe and stay with us as we move into the next segment, the official investigation and the search for answers beyond the verdict. Once the crime scene had been secured, the focus turned to forensics, reconstructing exactly what happened inside Kelly Pitt's home during her final hours. Detectives from Gwent Police's Major Crime Unit began by photographing and cataloging every visible mark, object, and footprint. Nothing was left undocumented. The forensic pathologist report later confirmed what officers already feared. Kelly Pitt had suffered extensive internal injuries caused by blunt force trauma. It was an assault that lasted minutes, but changed the lives of everyone connected to her forever. Investigators recovered items of evidential value and cross-checked them with witness accounts, CCTV footage, and digital data. They reconstructed a timeline from May 10th, when neighbors last heard activity, to May 12th, when Kelly's body was discovered. Cell site analysis, combined with CCTV from nearby shops, confirmed movements consistent with the official version presented later in court. At every stage, detectives coordinated closely with the Crown Prosecution Service, ensuring that each finding met evidentiary standards. Within a week, a comprehensive file was submitted to the CPS, and Louis Bush was formally charged with murder. The evidence package included forensic reports, witness statements, previous police callouts, and details of his existing restraining order. The case reached Newport Crown Court in late 2023. During proceedings, prosecutors outlined the chronology of events leading to Kelly Pitt's death, referencing protective measures already in place and the earlier assaults that had prompted them. Defense counsel did not contest the charge. In November 2023, Bush entered a guilty plea to murder. The presiding judge sentenced him to life imprisonment, ordering that he serve a minimum of 16 years before parole eligibility. In his remarks, the judge described the assault as ferocious and emphasized that Kelly had been a vulnerable woman trying to rebuild her life after years of fear. Members of Kelly's family delivered emotional victim impact statements, describing her as a loving mother and grandmother who always wanted the best for her children. The sentencing brought legal closure, but little comfort. Across Wales, the case reignited discussion about domestic violence, parent-child abuse, and the enforcement of restraining orders. Advocacy groups pointed out that Kelly's murder was not an isolated event, but part of a broader pattern. Mothers killed by sons or partners after repeated warnings. In March 2025, a report from The Guardian highlighted that nearly one-third of female homicide victims in the UK are killed by family members. The article cited Kelly's case as an example of systemic failure to protect victims from repeat offenders. Community organizations in Newport began new initiatives offering confidential outreach for parents experiencing intimidation from adult children, an issue still rarely discussed. Kelly's relatives supported these efforts, determined that her death would raise awareness and perhaps prevent another. Following internal review, when police reaffirmed a commitment to improving victims' safeguarding and risk assessment procedures, officers were reminded of the importance of immediate intervention when court orders are breached, especially in domestic abuse contexts. The Crown Prosecution Service also issued a statement acknowledging the tragedy and urging victims to maintain contact with support services even after legal action concludes. Experts argue that Kelly Pitt's death demonstrates how fragile protection can be when enforcement, monitoring, and communication break down across agencies. Each missed signal, each assumption that a home was safe, became another link in a chain that ended with irreversible loss. Beyond statistics and policy, this case is a human story. A woman who forgave too easily. A system that reacted too slowly. A family now divided by grief and regret. For those watching, Kelly's story is a reminder. Abuse does not always look like strangers or partners. Sometimes it exists within families bound by love and history. If you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, reach out. In the UK, contact Refuge on 0808 2247 or Men's Advice Line on 0808 801 0327. Help is available 24 hours a day. And before we close this story, take a moment to subscribe to Crimes and Clues. Every week we share real investigations told with truth and respect. Stories that keep important conversations alive. Tap subscribe and stay with us as we move into the final segment. The legacy of Kelly Pitt and what her story continues to teach us about prevention and awareness. When the courtroom doors closed and the sentence was read, the legal story of Kelly Pitt ended. But her legacy and the questions her case raised are still being written. Across Wales, her death became a catalyst for change. Local organizations began speaking more openly about abuse by adult children, a form of domestic violence often hidden behind shame and silence. In 2024, several community initiatives were launched in partnership with Gwent Police and victim support charities. Their message was simple: help must reach homes before fear turns fatal. Outreach workers in Newport describe an increase in calls from parents seeking guidance. They say awareness of Kelly's story gave others the courage to ask for protection. One advocate said, "When people hear what happened to Kelly, they realize it can happen to anyone, and that asking for help is strength, not failure." In 2024 and 2025, the Welsh government reaffirmed its commitment to tackling domestic abuse in all forms, expanding funding for housing support and mental health counseling. Police forces were urged to strengthen monitoring of restraining orders and improve coordination with local councils. The Crown Prosecution Service issued new training guidelines to help prosecutors recognize cases involving coercive control between parents and adult children. Kelly's relatives continue to speak publicly about the importance of early intervention. In interviews, they have said they want people to remember her not for how she died, but for how she lived. As a mother who loved deeply, even when love was returned with harm, they encourage others living in fear to reach out to Refuge, Women's Aid, or local helplines before it is too late. Kelly's death is one among many that have reignited a conversation about domestic abuse prevention in the UK. Her case demonstrates that legislation alone cannot protect victims. It requires enforcement, community awareness, and the courage to act. For viewers, this story is not an ending. It is a call to notice, to listen, and to speak up when patterns of fear and control appear close to home. If Kelly Pitt's story moved you, remember, awareness is action. Share this video to help others recognize the warning signs of abuse. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Crimes and Clues, where every episode uncovers truth with empathy, not spectacle. In the UK, if you or someone you know is in danger, contact Refuge on 0808 2247 or dial 999 in an emergency. For more resources, visit nationaldehelpline.org UK. Together, we can make sure stories like Kelly's are never repeated.